The morning I found the citation taped to my front door was the same morning I realized my HOA president had officially lost her mind. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, staring at the bright orange notice that screamed about violations and fines. My portable generator sat exactly where I had placed it 2 days ago, tucked neatly behind my air conditioning unit on the side of my house. It was barely visible from the street, positioned on a concrete pad I had poured myself, and connected to my transfer switch panel in case of emergencies. Living in Austin, Texas meant dealing with an increasingly unreliable power grid, and after last winter's blackouts left my family freezing for 3 days, I had decided never again. The citation was signed by Patricia Henderson, HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates. I had known Patricia for 5 years, ever since moving into this supposedly quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Austin. She was 53, drove a white Lexus SUV, and had that particular haircut that screamed entitlement. You know the one. Short, heavily highlighted, always perfectly styled. She wore oversized sunglasses even indoors and had a voice that could cut glass when she was displeased, which seemed to be her default state. I read the citation again, slowly this time, making sure I was not misunderstanding something. Nope. It clearly stated that generators were now prohibited on all properties within Meadowbrook Estates, effective immediately. The fine was $250 per day until the offending item was removed. My blood pressure spiked as I did the math. That would add up fast. My wife Nicole came to the door behind me. "Grant, what is that?" I handed her the paper without a word. Nicole read it, her expression shifting from confusion to anger in about 3 seconds flat. "This cannot be legal. We need a generator. Everyone in Texas needs backup power now." "I know," I said, pulling out my phone. I scrolled through the HOA bylaws that I had saved as a PDF. Generator restrictions were mentioned nowhere in the original documents we had signed when purchasing our home. This was new, arbitrary, and frankly insane. I called Patricia directly. She answered on the third ring, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Grant, I was expecting your call. Patricia, what is this about generators being banned? I just installed mine 2 days ago. Nothing in our HOA documents mentions anything about this." "Well, Grant, the board met last week and we voted unanimously to update our community standards. Several residents complained about the noise and unsightly appearance of generators. We have to maintain our property values. My generator is barely visible from the street and it is not even running. It is just sitting there for emergencies. That does not matter. The new rule is clear. All generators must be removed within 7 days or owners will face daily fines." I felt my jaw clench. "You cannot just make up rules on the fly, Patricia. There is a process for amending HOA bylaws. You need to notify all homeowners, hold a vote, allow for discussion." Her voice turned icy. "The board has full authority to update community standards as we see fit. It is in Section 12 of the governing documents. Perhaps you should read them more carefully." I had read them. Section 12 allowed the board to enforce standards, not create entirely new restrictions without homeowner input. But arguing with Patricia over the phone was pointless. She had already made up her mind. "I will be contacting a lawyer," I said evenly. "That is your right, Grant, but the fines start accruing today. Have a wonderful morning." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there gripping my phone, anger radiating through every nerve. Nicole touched my arm gently. "What do we do?" "I need to talk to the other board members. There has to be someone reasonable in that group." The Meadowbrook Estates HOA board consisted of 5 members. Patricia was president. The others were Dennis Miller, treasurer; Sharon Walsh, secretary; Robert Chen, at-large member; and Linda Morrison, at-large member. I had met them all at various community events but never had much interaction beyond pleasantries. I started with Robert Chen, who lived 3 streets over. Robert was an engineer at a tech company downtown and had always seemed level-headed. I walked to his house around 10 that morning, hoping to catch him before he left for work. Robert answered the door in business casual attire, clearly about to head out. "Grant, hey, what brings you by?" I explained the situation quickly, showing him the citation on my phone. His face remained carefully neutral as he listened. "Yeah, I heard about that," Robert said finally. "Patricia brought it up at the meeting. Honestly, I voted against it, but I was outvoted 3-2. "Who else voted against it?" "Dennis. He thought it was overreach too. But Sharon and Linda sided with Patricia. They have been pretty tight lately." "Can we challenge this? Call an emergency meeting or something?" Robert sighed, glancing at his watch. "Technically, yes, but you would need to get signatures from at least 20% of homeowners to force a special meeting. That is about 40 houses in our community, and even then, Patricia would control the agenda. This is insane. People need generators in Texas now. The power grid is not reliable." "I agree. But Patricia has been on a crusade lately about maintaining what she calls community aesthetics. She had someone cite the Johnsons last month because their trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. She is getting worse." I thanked Robert for his time and headed home, my mind racing. 40 signatures would take time, and meanwhile, I would be racking up fines. I needed a different approach. That afternoon, I called James Everett, a real estate attorney whose name I found through a quick online search. His office was in downtown Austin, and he agreed to a consultation the next day. James was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an office that smelled like coffee and old books. He listened to my explanation while taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Okay," he said when I finished. "First thing, do not remove the generator yet. If you comply immediately, it weakens your position. Second, I need to review your HOA governing documents in detail. From what you are describing, this sounds like a potentially invalid rule change." "What are my options if it is invalid?" "You could sue the HOA for overreach and seek an injunction preventing them from enforcing the fine. But litigation is expensive and slow. Another option is to gather those signatures Robert mentioned and force a membership vote to overturn the rule. That is faster but requires community support. And if neither works," James leaned back in his chair, "then you pay the fines, remove the generator, or sell your house. Those are your realistic options." The thought of selling had not occurred to me until that moment. Nicole and I had built a good life in that house. Our son attended a school nearby. We had friends in the neighborhood. But the idea of living under Patricia's increasingly authoritarian rule was becoming unbearable. "Let me think about it," I said. Over the next week, I tried the signature route. I printed up a petition explaining the situation and walked door to door through Meadowbrook Estates every evening after work. The responses were mixed. Some homeowners were sympathetic but afraid to cross Patricia. "She already has it out for us about our lawn," one neighbor told me apologetically. "I cannot risk more trouble." Others agreed enthusiastically and signed immediately. "That woman is a nightmare," said Tom Garrett, who lived 2 blocks over. "She sent me a violation notice because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it." By the end of the week, I had 31 signatures. Close, but not enough. And meanwhile, the daily fines were adding up. Patricia sent me an updated violation notice showing a balance of $1,750. I called James again. What happens if I just ignore the fines? Eventually, the HOA can place a lien on your property. If you try to sell or refinance, you would have to pay the lien plus legal fees and interest. They could even force a foreclosure sale, though that is rare. This is extortion. It is an HOA exercising its authority, valid or not. We could argue in court that the rule change was improper, but like I said, that takes time and money. I hung up feeling defeated. That evening, Nicole and I sat at the kitchen table after our son was asleep. We had been married for 12 years, and she knew me well enough to see I was at my breaking point. "What if we just sell?" she asked quietly. "Start fresh somewhere without an HOA. We would lose money. The market is not great right now, and with a lien threat hanging over us, we would have even less negotiating power. But maybe it is worth it. For our sanity." She had a point. The stress was affecting everything. I was barely sleeping, constantly angry, distracted at work. My job as an IT systems analyst required focus. I could not muster any more. "Let me make some calls," I said. "See what our options are." The next morning, I contacted 3 real estate agents. The first 2 gave me standard pitches about listing the house, dealing with repairs and staging, the usual process that would take months. The third agent, Maria Santos, asked me an interesting question. "Are you open to selling directly to a developer? You would probably get less than market value, but the sale would be fast and you would avoid all the HOA hassle." "How fast?" "Could close in 30 days if the developer is motivated. No contingencies, no inspections, cash deal." "Tell me more." Maria explained that a development company called Riverside Properties had been buying up parcels around Austin for new construction projects. They specialized in mixed-use and multi-family developments. She thought they might be interested in Meadowbrook Estates. "Why would they want my single house? Your neighborhood is in a prime location. Close to the highway, good schools, growing area. If they could acquire enough lots, they might be interested in redeveloping the whole area. Your property could be the start." It seemed like a long shot, but I was desperate enough to try anything. Maria set up a meeting with a representative from Riverside Properties for the following Tuesday. Meanwhile, Patricia was not letting up. She sent another citation, this time adding a notice that the HOA would begin legal proceedings to place a lien on my property if payment was not received within 10 days. The total was now $2,000. I forwarded everything to James, who sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA board pointing out the questionable legality of their rule change. Patricia responded through the HOA's attorney, essentially telling us to pound sand. "She is really dug in on this," James told me over the phone. "Honestly, Grant, I think your best move might be to sell. This woman is not going to back down, and fighting her is going to cost you more in legal fees than the house is worth." Tuesday came, and I met with David Park, a senior acquisitions manager for Riverside Properties. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, and David was all business. Mid-40s, sharp suit, carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with maps and documents. "Maria tells me you are having HOA troubles," he said after we ordered coffee. I gave him the full story, not holding back about Patricia or the generator ban or any of it. David listened carefully, occasionally making notes. "Interesting," he said when I finished. "Very interesting. Can I ask you a hypothetical question?" "Sure." "If you sold your property to us, and we redeveloped it into something the HOA could not control, would that bother you?" "What do you mean?" David pulled out a map of Meadowbrook Estates. He pointed to my property, which sat on a corner lot at the edge of the development. "Your lot is unique. It has access to 2 streets and technically, based on county records, It was never fully incorporated into the HOA plat map. There was a surveying error when the development was originally filed. My pulse quickened. What does that mean? It means your property might not actually be subject to HOA jurisdiction at all. The previous owners probably just assumed it was part of the HOA and paid dues voluntarily. But legally, you might have grounds to argue you are not bound by their rules. Are you serious? I would need to verify with a title company and probably have a surveyor look at it. But if I am right, your property is technically unincorporated land, which means it follows county zoning, not HOA restrictions. I sat back, my mind reeling. Why did not anyone catch this before? These things happen more often than you think. Paperwork errors, lazy title companies, owners who do not question things. But here is the really interesting part for us. If your lot is not part of the HOA, we could potentially buy it and develop it under commercial zoning rules. The county allows multi-family residential in this area. You want to build apartments on my lot, not just your lot. If we can prove your property is independent, it sets a precedent. We could challenge the entire HOA's authority. Some of these neighborhoods were incorporated improperly back in the day. If Meadowbrook Estates has other surveying errors, we might be able to acquire more properties and build a proper mixed-use development. Apartments, retail, maybe some office space. And the HOA could not stop you. Not if the properties are outside their jurisdiction. They can control what happens inside the HOA boundaries, but not on independent parcels. This was almost too good to be true. What are you offering? We would need to do the title research first, but if everything checks out, I could offer you $450,000 for your property. Cash, 30-day close. We handle all legal issues with the HOA. My house was worth maybe $400,000 on the open market, possibly less with the HOA problems. This was more money and infinitely less hassle. Do the research, I said. If it pans out, we have a deal. David shook my hand, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt hope. Riverside Properties moved fast. Within 3 days, they had a surveyor out examining property lines. Within a week, they had a title company issuing a preliminary report. David called me on a Friday afternoon with the news. Grant, you are not going to believe this. Not only is your property outside the HOA boundaries, but so are 3 other lots in Meadowbrook Estates. All corner properties, all incorporated incorrectly during the original development filing. This is bigger than we thought. What does this mean for me? It means we definitely want to buy your property, and we are going to pursue the other 3 as well. If we can acquire all 4 corner lots, we can build a significant development that completely surrounds the existing HOA neighborhood. It would be beautiful irony. When can we close? I am sending over a purchase agreement today. We can close in 3 weeks if you can be ready. I called Nicole immediately. She was at work but stepped away to take my call. I explained everything David had told me, the surveying error, the purchase offer, all of it. $450,000, she repeated. Grant, that is incredible. And we would be free of Patricia and this nightmare HOA. Do it. Please just do it. I signed the purchase agreement that evening. Riverside Properties moved forward with title work, and I braced myself for Patricia's reaction. Because she was definitely going to find out. The explosion came exactly 1 week later. Patricia showed up at my door at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, her face red with fury, waving a printed email. "What is this about you selling to a developer?" she shrieked. "Good morning, Patricia. Yes, I am selling my house. It is my property and my decision." "You cannot sell to a developer. This is a residential neighborhood. The HOA has to approve all sales. Actually, Patricia, you do not. My property is not part of your HOA. Her eyes went wide. Excuse me. I explained the surveying error, the title research, everything. With each word, Patricia's face grew redder, her hands shaking. That is impossible. Every property in Meadowbrook Estates is part of the HOA. It says so in the declarations. Except the declarations were filed incorrectly for my lot and 3 others. We are outside your boundaries, which means you have no authority over what I do with my property. I will sue you. The HOA will sue you and that developer and everyone involved. Go ahead. We have title insurance, surveys, and county records on our side. You will lose, and it will cost your HOA tens of thousands in legal fees. Patricia was practically vibrating with rage. You are doing this because of the generator ban. This is revenge. No, Patricia. I am doing this because you created an impossible situation, and I am choosing the option that works best for my family. If you had been reasonable, if you had followed proper procedures for rule changes, if you had listened to homeowners instead of acting like a dictator, none of this would be happening. I am the HOA president. I have authority. You had authority over properties within the HOA boundaries. You never had authority over mine, and now you are about to have a multi-family apartment complex as your new neighbor. Enjoy. She stormed off my porch, nearly tripping over her own feet in fury. I watched her screech out of my driveway in her white Lexus and allowed myself a small smile. The next 3 weeks were chaotic. Patricia did try to sue, filing an emergency injunction to block the sale. But Riverside Properties had anticipated this and had a team of lawyers ready. The judge reviewed the survey evidence and title documents and dismissed Patricia's case within 48 hours. The sale would proceed. Meanwhile, word spread through Meadowbrook Estates about what was happening. The reaction was split. Some homeowners were angry, accusing me of betraying the neighborhood. Others were thrilled, seeing it as karma for Patricia's increasingly tyrannical leadership. Tom Garrett, the guy with the mailbox issues, stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer. I heard what you did. That is amazing. Patricia has been making everyone miserable for years. Someone needed to stand up to her. I am not trying to ruin the neighborhood, I said. I just wanted to live my life without constant harassment. I know, but you opened a door. Other people are talking about selling too if developers are interested. Maybe this whole HOA will collapse and we can finally have some peace. I had not considered that possibility, but it made sense. If Riverside Properties bought the other 3 corner lots, and more homeowners decided to sell, the entire character of Meadowbrook Estates would change. Patricia's carefully controlled kingdom would crumble. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a title company office in North Austin. Nicole and I arrived early, both nervous and excited. David Park was already there, along with 2 other Riverside Properties representatives and their attorney. We signed papers for 90 minutes. Stacks and stacks of documents, disclosures, warranties, title transfers. Finally, the title agent handed us a cashier's check for $450,000, minus closing costs. Congratulations, David said, shaking my hand. You just made a very good decision. What happens now? I asked. We finalized plans for the development. We are going to build a 3-story apartment complex on your lot and the adjacent corner property we are acquiring next month. 72 units total, modern design, competitive pricing. We break ground in about 6 months. And the HOA? David smiled. The HOA has no say over our property since it is outside their jurisdiction. They can complain all they want, but legally they cannot stop us. And once we establish that precedent, we will pursue additional properties in the area. This is just the beginning. Nicole and I walked out of that office feeling lighter than we had in months. We had already found a rental house in a non-HOA neighborhood while we looked for a permanent home to purchase. No more arbitrary rules, no more Patricia, no more stress, but the story was not over yet. About 2 months after we closed, I got a call from Tom Garrett. He sounded excited. "Grant, you need to hear this. Patricia is in serious trouble." "What happened?" "Someone did an audit of the HOA finances. Turns out she has been embezzling money from the community fund for 3 years. Over $80,000. I felt a surge of vindication. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Dennis Miller, the treasurer, got suspicious after you left because Patricia kept pushing for special assessments but the books never balanced. He hired a forensic accountant. They found dozens of fraudulent transactions. Patricia was writing herself checks and billing the HOA for fake maintenance work." "Has anyone called the police?" "They did yesterday. Patricia got arrested at her house this morning. The HOA is filing criminal charges for theft and fraud." I could barely believe it. After everything, Patricia's own greed had brought her down. What happens to the HOA now? Emergency elections. Dennis is taking over as interim president. He already announced they are reversing the generator ban and several other ridiculous rules Patricia implemented. People are actually happy for once. Good. That is really good. And there is more. Remember those other 3 corner properties David mentioned? 2 of them just sold to Riverside Properties. This whole area is about to change big time. Over the next year, I watched from a distance as Meadowbrook Estates transformed. Riverside Properties acquired a total of 6 properties around the neighborhood's perimeter and began construction on 2 apartment complexes and a small retail strip. The developments were actually quite nice, modern architecture, well-maintained landscaping, adding vibrancy to an area that had been stagnant for years. Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty to felony theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to repay the stolen money. Her mugshot made the local news, and I would be lying if I said I did not feel a sense of justice seeing it. The HOA underwent major reforms. Dennis became the new president and immediately implemented transparent financial reporting, proper procedures for rule changes, and regular homeowner meetings where people could actually voice concerns. The neighborhood stabilized, and ironically, property values increased despite the nearby apartments. Turns out people liked having shopping and dining options within walking distance. Nicole and I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes away. No HOA, just county regulations and neighbors who minded their own business. I installed a generator the day we moved in. Nobody said a word. One Saturday afternoon, about 18 months after all of this began, I drove past my old property. The apartment complex was nearly complete, a handsome 3-story building with balconies and big windows. A sign announced grand opening and leasing information. It looked good, far better than what Patricia would have allowed if she had controlled that land. I thought about everything that had happened. The generator ban that seemed like such an outrage at the time had actually freed me from a situation that was only getting worse. If Patricia had been reasonable, if she had followed proper procedures, I probably would have just removed the generator and stayed miserable for years under her control. Instead, her overreach pushed me to explore options I had never considered, and those options led to a better outcome than I could have imagined. David Park called me occasionally to update me on their projects. Riverside Properties had become a major presence in the area, acquiring more properties and building thoughtfully designed multi-family housing that the market desperately needed. They treated me well throughout the process, and David admitted I had opened their eyes to opportunities they had not previously considered. "Your situation taught us to look closer at these HOA neighborhoods," he told me during one conversation. "A lot of them have paperwork issues from when they were originally filed. We have found errors in 3 other developments now. It has become a significant part of our business model." "Glad I could help," I said, genuinely meaning it. The legal case against Patricia moved slowly through the court system, but eventually, justice was served. Beyond the criminal charges, several Meadowbrook Estates homeowners filed a civil lawsuit against her for mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. She lost her house, her savings, everything. I felt no sympathy. She had wielded power carelessly, treating people's homes and lives as her personal fiefdom. The consequences were earned. Nicole and I settled into our new normal. Our son adapted quickly to his new school, making friends and joining soccer. We hosted barbecues without worrying about noise complaints or violation notices. I built a workshop in my garage and installed solar panels on the roof, projects that would have required months of HOA approval in my old neighborhood. The freedom was intoxicating. Sometimes I ran into former Meadowbrook Estates neighbors around town. Most were friendly. Some even thanked me for standing up to Patricia. A few remained bitter, blaming me for the changes to their neighborhood, but I did not lose sleep over it. You cannot please everyone, especially people who preferred living under authoritarian control to embracing necessary change. The generator that started everything sat beside my new house, connected to the transfer switch panel, ready for the next power emergency. It ran quietly during monthly test cycles, a reliable piece of equipment doing exactly what it was designed to do. Such a simple thing to have caused such massive upheaval, but that was the nature of HOAs. Small issues became battlegrounds when the wrong people held power. One evening, about 2 years after the whole saga began, I was sitting on my back porch enjoying the sunset when Nicole came out with 2 glasses of wine. She handed me one and sat down beside me. "Do you ever regret how things went down?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. No. I regret that it had to happen at all. I wish Patricia had been reasonable. But given how things were, I think we made the right choice. We are happier now. "We are," she agreed. "And you know what? That generator has not even kicked on yet, all that fighting over something we have not even needed." I laughed. "That is not the point. The point is we have it if we need it. That is called being prepared, and not living under a crazy HOA president." That too. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink. Somewhere across town, the apartments on my old property were filling with residents, people who needed affordable housing near good jobs and schools. The retail strip was attracting small businesses, creating a walkable neighborhood center that actually served the community. Meadowbrook Estates had evolved despite Patricia's best efforts to keep it frozen in time. I thought about all the HOA horror stories I had heard over the years. People being fined for leaving their trash cans out too long, or planting the wrong flowers, or painting their door the wrong color. Small-minded bureaucrats drunk on petty power, making people miserable over nothing. Patricia had been an extreme example, but she was not unique. These battles played out in neighborhoods across America every day. My situation had worked out because of a lucky surveying error and a developer looking for opportunities. Most people were not that fortunate. They either endured the abuse, racked up fines they could not afford, or sold at a loss. The system was broken, giving too much unchecked power to volunteer boards with no real accountability. But maybe things were changing. More people were pushing back against HOA overreach, filing lawsuits, demanding transparency, voting out bad leadership. Maybe Patricia's downfall would serve as a warning to other power-hungry HOA presidents. Probably not, but I could hope. Tom Garrett called me occasionally with updates from Meadowbrook Estates. Under Dennis's leadership, the HOA had become remarkably functional. They maintained common areas, organized neighborhood events, and enforced genuinely reasonable rules about property maintenance. Morale was high, people were engaged, and the constant stream of violation notices had stopped. "It is like living in a completely different neighborhood," Tom told me during one call. "People actually like being here now. Who knew that was possible?" "Good leadership makes all the difference," I said. Patricia was more than bad leadership. She was a cautionary tale. He was right. Patricia represented everything wrong with unchecked authority in these small-scale governing bodies. She had started with good intentions, probably, wanting to maintain property values and community standards. But power corrupted her, gradually at first, then completely. By the end, she was stealing from her neighbors and creating arbitrary rules to punish anyone who questioned her. It was a slow-motion dictatorship in suburban form. Her arrest had been satisfying to watch from a distance. The news footage showed her being walked to a police car in handcuffs, her expression shocked and defiant. Even facing criminal charges, she seemed unable to accept that she had done anything wrong. That was the nature of people like her, I supposed. They became so convinced of their own righteousness that accountability felt like persecution. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I did not attend, having no desire to see Patricia again, but I followed news reports and Tom kept me informed. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, fake invoices for work that was never performed. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue stress and confusion, but the jury was not buying it. Guilty on all counts. She had stolen $83,000 over 3 years. Money that should have gone to neighborhood improvements, tree trimming, street maintenance. Instead, Patricia had used it for personal expenses, vacations, shopping sprees. The selfishness was breathtaking. During sentencing, the judge was blunt. "You held a position of trust, and you violated that trust systematically for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, people who relied on you to manage their community responsibly. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained pattern of criminal behavior. The sentence must reflect the seriousness of these crimes. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, full restitution plus interest." Patricia sobbed as the sentence was read, finally understanding that actions had consequences. I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices. Life moved forward. Seasons changed. My generator sat ready but unused, a symbol more than a necessity. The apartments on my old property filled with residents, becoming part of the neighborhood fabric. Property values continued to rise. Austin grew and evolved as cities do. I occasionally drove past Meadowbrook Estates, curious about how the neighborhood was developing. The apartments had integrated well, their modern design actually making the older single-family homes look more charming by contrast. The retail strip was thriving, with a coffee shop, a pizza place, and a small grocery store serving both the apartments and the neighborhood. It was urban planning working correctly, mixing housing types and creating walkable amenity. Dennis had done an impressive job stabilizing the HOA. He limited board terms, required financial audits, and created actual democratic processes for rule changes. The neighborhood was functioning how HOAs were theoretically supposed to work, maintaining standards without becoming authoritarian. But I had no regrets about leaving. Even reformed, an HOA was still an extra layer of governance I did not need or want. My new neighborhood operated just fine under county regulations and basic neighbor courtesy. No violation notices, no board meetings, no drama, just people living their lives in peace. The development company, Riverside Properties, sent me a thank you gift after their first year of operations on the property. A nice bottle of bourbon and a handwritten note from David Park thanking me for the opportunity and partnership. They were good people, professional and ethical in their dealings. The project had been successful enough that they were pursuing similar developments around Austin, following the model we had pioneered. Nicole and I celebrated our 15th anniversary that year with a trip to Colorado. As we hiked through mountain trails, breathing clean air and enjoying pure freedom, I reflected on how much had changed. The generator controversy seemed almost absurd in retrospect, such a small thing that had cascaded into something massive. But that was how life worked sometimes. Small events triggered large consequences, and you either adapted or got crushed. I had adapted. I had recognized an impossible situation and found a creative solution. It had not been easy, and there were moments of serious stress, but the outcome justified the struggle. We were happier, healthier, and wealthier than we would have been if I had just surrendered to Patricia's demands. That was the real lesson, I decided. When faced with unreasonable authority, you had options beyond compliance. You could fight, you could leave, you could find loopholes and creative solutions. The key was refusing to accept that the unreasonable demands were inevitable or acceptable. Patricia had counted on people being too tired or scared to push back. She had ruled through intimidation and attrition, grinding people down until they complied. But she had finally pushed someone who pushed back harder, and her entire house of cards collapsed. Back home in Austin, life continued its comfortable rhythm. Work, family, hobbies, friends. The generator sat beside my house, quietly ready, never bothering anyone. I maintained it properly, testing it monthly, changing the oil annually. It was a good piece of equipment, reliable and well-built. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia was released from prison after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. She had moved out of state, apparently to Florida, starting over somewhere nobody knew her history. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, though I doubted it. People like Patricia rarely changed fundamentally. Meadowbrook Estates continued thriving under Dennis's leadership. The neighborhood had actually become more desirable after the changes, attracting younger families who appreciated the walkable amenities and reasonable HOA governance. Property values had increased 20% since Patricia's arrest. Turned out that authoritarian rule was bad for property values. Who knew? Tom Garrett and I remained friendly, meeting for lunch occasionally. He had become an advocate for HOA reform, writing articles for local publications, and speaking at city council meetings about the need for better oversight of these organizations. His experiences under Patricia's rule had radicalized him in the best possible way. "I never thought I would become an activist," he told me during one lunch. "But someone has to fight for reasonable governance in these communities. Too many people are suffering under petty tyrants like Patricia." "You are doing good work," I said, meaning it. "Someone needs to speak up. You started it by refusing to back down. You showed people that fighting back was possible." Maybe that was true. Maybe my small act of defiance had inspired others to demand better. That felt good, knowing that standing up for myself had helped others. Years passed. My son grew, eventually heading off to college. Nicole and I became empty nesters, adapting to the quiet house and new phase of life. The generator remained faithfully beside the house, occasionally earning its keep during the handful of power outages that struck our area. Each time it hummed to life, keeping our refrigerator cold and lights on. I thought about how much trouble that simple machine had caused and how much better off we were because of it. The apartments on my old property became an established part of the neighborhood, no longer controversial or noteworthy. The residents were good neighbors, quiet and respectful. The retail strip evolved, businesses coming and going, but the overall concept remained successful. David Park's vision had worked out well. I ran into Dennis at a grocery store one day, about 5 years after everything had happened. We chatted in the produce section, catching up on life. He was still HOA president, still running things with common sense and decency. "You know," he said, "in a weird way, what you did saved our neighborhood. Patricia was driving everyone crazy and nobody knew how to stop her. Your situation exposed her completely and gave us the chance to rebuild properly. We should thank you. No thanks necessary. I was just trying to protect my family. That is what we all should have been doing. Instead, we let her intimidate us into silence. You were braver." I did not feel particularly brave. I had just been angry enough and lucky enough to find a solution, but I appreciated his words. As we parted ways, Dennis called after me. "Hey, Grant, if you ever want to move back to Meadowbrook Estates, we would love to have you. I promise it is different now." I smiled and waved but had no intention of returning. We had built a good life where we were, free from the complications of HOA governance. That chapter was closed, and I was content to leave it that way. The story of my battle with Patricia became something of a local legend in Austin real estate circles. Agents told it to clients as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of reviewing governing documents carefully. Developers studied it as an example of creative property acquisition. I had become an accidental case study in standing up to unreasonable authority. Sometimes people recognized my name and asked if I was the guy with the generator. I usually confirmed it and answered their questions politely. Most people were supportive, sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for fighting back. Occasionally, someone criticized me for ruining a neighborhood, but those people usually revealed themselves as HOA board members or people who valued control over freedom. Now, sitting on my porch in the peaceful evening, generator humming quietly beside the house, I felt deep satisfaction with how everything had turned out. The path had been stressful and uncertain, but the destination was worth it. We lived on our terms now, free from arbitrary rules and petty bureaucrats. Nicole joined me outside, settling into the chair beside mine. We had weathered many storms together over the years, and she had been my rock throughout the HOA ordeal. Her calm perspective had kept me grounded when I wanted to rage, and her support had given me courage to keep fighting. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, just reflecting on everything, how far we have come. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." She smiled and took my hand. We sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set over Austin, two people who had fought for their freedom and won. The generator hummed its quiet song beside us, no longer a source of conflict but simply a tool doing its job. In the end, that was all it had ever been. A tool, a practical solution to a real problem. Patricia had turned it into a battle over control and authority, and that battle had destroyed her while liberating me. The irony was perfect and complete. Somewhere in Florida, Patricia was presumably living her life, hopefully having learned from her mistakes, but probably not. Somewhere in Meadowbrook Estates, Dennis was running board meetings with competence and decency. Somewhere in those apartments on my old property, 72 families were living their lives, unaware of the drama that had preceded their homes. And here in my backyard, I sat with my wife and my generator, at peace with the world and my choices. The battle was long over. I had won everything that mattered. The lights of Austin twinkled in the distance, a city growing and changing, full of people fighting their own battles, large and small. I had fought mine and emerged stronger. The generator that had started everything would outlast us all, a durable machine built to weather storms. It seemed fitting somehow. We all need something to anchor us during difficult times, something reliable we can count on when systems fail. For me, it had been that generator. Not just the machine itself, but what it represented: preparation, independence, refusal to accept unreasonable restrictions. Patricia had tried to take that away, and in doing so had lost everything. I had defended it and gained more than I could have imagined. The lesson was clear, even if people rarely learned it. Freedom was worth fighting for, even over something as simple as a generator.